Live. Because if we're not, that would be
You
a shame. I mean, we'd have a
you
great
do
conversation anyway.
you
But
you do all your you do all your chats.
looks good.
Right.
All right. Welcome everybody
All right.
to another episode of this whatever thing is. Welcome, Michael. How are you doing?
Hi. I'm good. I just moved back to San Francisco from New York from being there a year and a half, and so everything's a mess. Everything that you see here is clean. Everything around here is crazy. And Max has already kind of seen me move stuff around while we were warming up,
Yeah, you should have seen
which is
him.
funny. The camera is duct taped. Well,
Exactly.
I think it's like masking tape. There's about 15 pieces of masking tape keeping the camera up because the desk tripod, of course, the desk tripod nerds, is currently in storage or on a truck. I don't know. I wish they gave you like GPS access to that kind
Yeah.
of
Oh,
stuff.
they don't do that?
I don't think so. No,
Even parcels
it's not
have that.
like
How does an entire truck not have that?
it's Uber for like your stuff, if
Yeah, fair
only.
point. It should be though.
But it could be, and that would be cool. So someone should disrupt the moving industry and these pods.
Yeah.
Now
For
we've
sure.
used the word disrupt, so we're ready. This is a tech podcast now.
Yeah, this is basically a tech
Um,
podcast now. Now, Michael, why don't you tell everybody who you are, and I guess give your intro. What's your elevator pitch? If you meet somebody for the first time, what do you say?
Hi, I'm Michael. I like wine and cocktails. No, I mean, this is one thing that I don't like about this is what we're going to get into then. It's like, about the US, it's like, well, who are you and what do you do? Like where do you work? Especially in San Francisco, right? Like
Yeah.
where do you work? I'll just introduce myself as hi, I'm Michael. I've been on the internet since I was 11, and that's kind of what got me here. And you hear a lot of these stories, of course, but yeah, I wasn't like the most productive child. I was like definitely a kid, but I got internet access because my grandma gave me a stipend every week of 10 guilders at the time. We didn't have euros yet.
Oh
And that
wow.
was 5.5 hours of dial up. And
No
so,
way.
I would put it in a jar, and then that was like allocated, and my parents would pay the telecom bill with that.
That's
Basically, it
amazing.
was kind of funny. And then rather quickly, I think a year and a half later, my hometown was the place where they were testing out cable for the first time in the Netherlands. There's like 3 towns, and my hometown was one of them. And I just signed up online for that like preview version over 10 times. And so we got a late call, like an 8:30 p.m. call. And my mom picks up the phone and she's like, "Hey, Michael, it's for you." And I'm like, who the hell calls me at like 8:30 p.m. on a weekday? And it was this lady who was like, "Hey, so we noticed that you signed up for our internet service X times, and we think that you may really want it." So and I was like, "Hi, I'm 12. Sure, I want it." And
That
so
is
they gave it to me,
amazing.
and or like, of course, we were one of the first people in the city, and so yeah. So then I was online all the time, and got into all the things like forums and forum signatures and avatars and
Nice.
PHP 4 and running like really dumb little websites. And eventually, I just went to college. There was a course that was called Communication and Multimedia Design that was not at all a great course, and I have been on the record many a times of that, even though they still try to make me do like guest lectures there. It wasn't really great because like everything was moving so fast they couldn't keep up, and so like I'm not blaming them for it. It was just like very complicated. They were teaching like ASP and like VB script and all this kind of stuff when PHP was like all on vogue and all this kind of stuff, right? So it was very complicated to go to a class when you've already been doing Photoshop for like forever and then get docked a point because stylistically like you wanted to like connect the letters to the block, and the teacher who had only gotten like a graphic design degree from some other online school, like it was very complicated. But I went there because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and that was I think this is where luck comes in a lot. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and this was the place where you could have a laptop. This was the only course in my
Oh,
like area where you would just have a laptop on you 24/7, and you get access to like the network.
nice.
There's
Yeah,
a there's
right.
a
Of
theme here.
course.
And so you're like just you're just playing like video games like in your off hours and this kind of stuff. It wasn't at all like being the most productive child. Um, but it was funny because eventually I thought about dropping out of that course. And the reason why I actually went into it was in the Netherlands, there is this way to get what they call a propedeuse, which means a single year. If you ace the first year, then you get access to all the master degrees, like roughly all of them, except like medical and law.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, I'll do 1 year of this. Maybe I'll figure out what I want to do,
Oh,
and then I can decide. I'll get a real job.
yeah, right.
And so in the meantime, things changed, right? I wonder if this camera is like creeping lower now. Things changed, and really, it became this thing of I still don't know what I want to do. So I'll go into year number two, and more frustration builds, obviously, because I wasn't really enjoying my job very well, or my
Yeah,
course very
degree.
well. But I was like learning a little more, and on the side, I was like doing a lot of like programming and this kind of stuff. And so that got me to do an internship at what at the time was the coolest local agency, which for relatively means something, right?
Yeah,
And
sure.
their whole shtick was they got a lot of the museum contracts. So these museum websites that are like kind of edgy, they're all Flash, of course. So I was allowed to like together with my best friend Luke, um, we both applied. We both had the same exact profile, like rather mediocre designer, like rather mediocre programmer, but like for whatever that was available there for. It was a paid internship for 300 euros a month.
Oh, wow. So it was yours at the
Was
time.
Yeah, like um, but they so he the owner hired us both, and we just like sat in a little like room that was about half the size of this place. It was like 9 to 10 like square meters, so like a 90 to 100 square feet, and we had this giant screens, like these like 17 or 19-inch like CRT displays, and we were just like sitting in this very warm room programming. And so I thought I was a programmer. And so yeah, then rather quickly into that. Well, the cool thing was we launched the thing for a local housing agency, and that was the moment where I was like, oh, this is cool. This is what I want to do. I guess I'm going to do a career where there's no money in this. Like, there's no web design wasn't really a thing, right? It was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
2004, 2005, um, and um, and slowly but surely, I also started realizing that the owner of the place was mostly he was like this idea guy, and he was selling things that we didn't know how we would make it, and so we were always like kind of stuck making it, as like a 19-year-old, which is cool. But we generally tended to figure these things out. But I rather quickly like had an issue with the way that he did business, and that he didn't at least get us in the loop on that, or like ask us about, hey, I'm gonna like pitch this to these people. How feasible is that?
Yeah,
Are
right.
we even gonna be able to do this? Um, and so whilst both my one of my best friends still to this day, Luke, and I got this job. We got a part-time job while we were still in college. I very quickly wanted to like move and do something else. And then one of my best friends from high school came around and was like, "Hey, I met this person, and he was driving a taxi to like pay for college on the weekends. And I met this person in a taxi, and he wants to invest in a tech company." And I was just like, I mean, what the fuck does that mean, right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's the most random connection ever.
so super super random. But basically, what this person did was he just gave us free office space, and like we just filled it with some stuff, and we had like a kind of like miniature starting capital basically, which was like I think a couple of I think 10 or 20K basically to just put some stuff in. And we just started like kind of trying to start an agency slash incubator, which not a great idea. I still think to this day it's not a great idea, because you're always constantly mixing your time with the things that you really want to work on
Yeah.
with the time that you're like making money with. So it's very complicated. But yeah, we did that for about 5.5 years.
Oh,
So that
wow.
was like that was where I just constantly like ground away hours. And about halfway through, I started bumping into some, I was on Twitter, obviously. I started bumping into some people that were doing things that really aligned with that I was like really looking up to, that just aligned with stuff that I cared about. And obviously those are like the Zeldmans, like Ethan
Yeah.
Marcotte, Tim Van Dam, like those, like that crew of people around the like 2009 mark. And
Were you still programming at this point, or had you already transitioned more into a design role?
I was doing the hybrid thing. So I had this really extremely smart technical co-founder who was also very unreliable, because he was one of those. He's like one of those like 10x engineers that like sometimes he would just not sleep, or he would go to bed at like 6 a.m. And so I was
Yeah, right.
fixing a lot of the bugs like that would just pop during daytime, because we didn't have good continuous integration. We didn't have any like kind of meaningful thing. It was like upload a bunch of PHP files to a server.
Yeah, right.
Like we weren't even like doing a lot of good version control up until like a couple of years in, right? So like it was very sketchy at the time. But what was cool was like, as soon as I started, really seeing this open web thing, and there's like so many like names to drop around that era of like people who were writing books and who were like publishing things online. A list apart was obviously like one of the key things.
I have literally their entire book series on a bookshelf, like over there.
Yeah, exactly, right. And it looks really nice because
Yeah,
it's all
all that
colorful.
also, but it's also great books, to be
And
fair.
well, yeah, and the best part is like they've gone with the time, and they're like and they're bringing in a much more diverse group of people as well, writing these books like from different angles, and not just like the standard voices, which I think that was a little bit of an issue that we were dealing with back then.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was really important at the time was the most important thing about wasn't that everyone was publishing this or that people were talking about it, but that was that they were just putting themselves out there. And so all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm here, I'm in my hometown. It's called Maastricht. It's like 120,000 people ish. And I had access to this whole like the World Wide Web. And like all these people that had like somewhat similar interests, similar inspiration.
Yeah.
And then I went to my first conference, which I think was in Belgium. I think it was called Twist. It was like a one-time thing, and it was in Belgium. And I met a couple of people that were talking about going to Deconstruct. And then I went to Brighton like a couple months
Oh.
later, and that's where I met this whole crew of people who are now kind of have been spread across the world and have moved all around.
Yeah.
And that was all of a sudden where you would go there, you would have all these like-minded people, you'd be like, eating and drinking with them, and you would just all of a sudden feel like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be like.
Yeah.
And that was extremely cool to me. And so there was like a whole like schedule. I think we had like 4 or 5 a year. And so for like the next 2 years, I kind of hopped over and also started, putting stuff on the internet. And I was just like, hey, this is what I made, like this is maybe meaningful. And I still to this day have this issue of like, why would I write this? Or like whenever like someone screams something into the void, it's like, well, the stuff that you're saying is like 90% right, but like also there's so many angles that I can hack this on. And so that's why I still don't publish as much to this day. But I do remember there was this one thing. And so if someone would ask you, who are you? It's like, well, on Christmas Eve, 2008, I wrote a snow in CSS3, and it was based on Natalie Downs' original version. I just basically like wrote a bunch of snow in like 3 lines of JavaScript and a bunch of CSS, because all of a sudden all these browsers were getting blur effects and like this kind of stuff.
Oh.
And that was like kind of the first thing that went into the world. My parents and I have this tradition that whenever we're together for Christmas, on Christmas Eve, we do like the hibachi. We call it gourmetten in Dutch, but we call it hibachi, where you have like a big plate that is hot, and you put some raw like fish and meat on it, and like you just eat together around a table.
Yeah, nice.
And so after that was done, I kind of sat back on the couch and just made that thing in a couple hours, and I threw it onto the world, and it got a bunch of retweets, and I was like, oh my god, this is like, I guess I do this now. This is amazing. And that was kind of like the path that went towards eventually being obviously very lucky to join a company like Instagram. And that's when I started thinking about, okay, how can I put myself out there? How can I be effective to people?
Yeah.
Because that's always been kind of the thing. It's like I loved editorial blog posts at the time, and I made a couple, and that was also the reason why I think Kevin, it was like a combination of whatever he's told me. It's like a combination of a Dribbble post and then noticing that I was like in town was like why we eventually ended up having lunch.
That is such a coincidence.
Super coincidence, but that was never my thing. I always wanted to be practical to people, and so the biggest claim to fame I think pre-Instagram was I made this. I found out that Skype 5 was launched, and I found out that like their UI was the absolute worst, and it was all then? Like there was no density. Like in Skype 2, it was like they went from 2 to 5, and 2 was this like kind of dense thing that looked like Adium. Remember Adium? And Skype 5 was this like super, like they had so many margins, so much padding. And a group of us, the like group that went to all these conferences, we had a chat on, like we had a group chat on there because we didn't have all these other platforms.
Yeah, of course. Yes. Skype was the shit back in the day.
Exactly. And so we were in this group chat and you could see like 3 messages. I think I still have the site up and you can see Jack Osborne literally like being in the who like now works at Foursquare and has been there for a very long time. You could see him be like send three messages in the original UI, and then I changed it because I found out that the inner workings was just HTML and CSS. It was just a web. It was like a web view, like a UI web view. And so I would extract the package, and then I would like look at all this kind of stuff, and I made a little sandbox so I could like edit all the CSS and like really figure out like how it should look, all the states, all the error states, all of the stuff. And I yanked that back onto the internet, and I think there were like it ended at version 1.5 because like I was constantly doing updates. Skype was constantly doing updates, and eventually after all that time, they even did a contest so you could design your own chat style, and I won an iPad.
No way!
Because I just sent the thing over like straight. I was like, here's the GitHub repo.
They just gave you an iPad for the work you've been doing.
It was just like that was like the number. I think that was like the winning prize or something. And then they never did anything with it because like it's of course Skype. Skype has had this really interesting history, of course. Yeah. But that was like I wanted to be productive, and that was like how I for a couple of years had a kind of positive impact on people's lives. And then obviously got to Instagram, working remotely at first. Because we had disbanded the company and I started freelancing. And one of the things that I really wanted to focus on with freelancing was like instead of running a place, I truly want to focus on design. I will do some front end, but preferably I don't want to do any like technological stuff because I just had so much PTSD from all of the bug fixes and like all this kind of stuff. So
yeah, fair enough.
So really breaking it down back to design. And after the first conversations with Kevin, I had a lunch with one of the first engineers. His name is Shane Sweeney. We all hit it off. Mikey was at LeWeb. So I actually, after I flew back home, the camera has been.
I was about to say, I think your camera's about to fall.
This thing. Oh, no.
I don't think the gaffer tape's working too well.
I don't think the gaffer tape is working too well either. Well, this is a sad state of affairs. All right. Well, we can just cut over. I'll just do this. Ta-da!
It won't look as nice, but at least it's not going to fall over.
It won't look as nice, but at least the camera doesn't drop. There we go.
Yeah,
that's too bad. I'll tweet a picture of like how this thing was.
Yeah, I want to see the behind the scenes here.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. But yeah, so Mike and I had a Skype call and eventually started working for Instagram and really focusing on a lot of the web stuff because that was my background.
Okay, hold on a second though. So you're this guy in the Netherlands. You've run an agency for 5.5 years. You leave the agency to focus more on design. Mm-hmm. You do freelance.
Yep.
How do you go from there to working for a startup in the US, specifically in San Francisco, I guess?
Yeah. So, what I think was the way that I've always liked to do things, and this comes from a point of having the ability. First of all, having the ability to my whole education was like $6,000 and my parents paid for it. Yeah. So that's a point of privilege, right?
Yeah.
I eventually, when I moved out and then I realized that with running a company yourself and not being good at business finance and that kind of stuff is gets you like into a bunch of stress. And so I have, great parents that, just allow me to move back in, even give me an extra room. So I actually had an office room, and
No
then the old
way.
guest room, which is super tiny. I just like stored a bed in there. And that's like how I lived life for like a year and a half. Um, and I think that, those things were really just allow me to purely focus and spend hours on this stuff. Like, it's not like I had a couple of good friends, but I really just hyper focused on this work, which I think is maybe not the healthiest thing at the time,
Yeah.
or in general. But so when I went freelance, at first, at the start of 2011, I gave my co-founders a heads up. So I gave them half a year, because I think that, like any kind of succession planning or transitions, you need to do well. And I was 25, I think. Like, what do I know about succession planning? So I was like, we can figure it out. We can either like get someone to replace me, we can like disband the company, like whatever we wanted. And then, and what I did in those 6 months was just purely save money. So I had runway for the rest of the year. So I didn't have to worry about
Yeah.
running out of finances. And so I could pick my clients, because the
Yeah.
client you have is the client that you're going to get. And so the first month, no clients. And I was like, well, this is actually great, because no one has time to work on their own website. No one has time to do any kind of work for themselves, because there's client work in the way. Lesson learned from the incubator piece. And so to me, the client piece was this interesting bit where I could just pick and choose eventually. But that is like a purely coming from a place of luxury, right? Because I remember having
Yeah.
the first conversation, and I kept the rate the same from the agency. I lost all the overhead, and so I sent out the first offer to to a startup in my hometown, and they were like, "We don't have this budget," and it was like, I think like $4,000 or something, or $5,000.
Sure.
Yeah, we can't pay this. And so I was like, okay, what I'll do. My rate at the time was, I think, 85 or 90 euros an hour. What I'll do is I'll give you a contract for one day. You can have all the intellectual property on this work. If you want to take it to another designer and they can work with it. And after that one day, you can tell me if you have the budget. And so I just like kind of went ham on that one day of work.
Oh,
But
interesting.
kept it honest, and like didn't like spend much more than 8 hours on it. And so then I would just give them a bunch of PhDs. Obviously, this is not proper design etiquette. Like, you're
Yeah. Yeah.
supposed to do
Sure.
these like exploration periods, all this kind of stuff. But it was just like, no, like their stuff like doesn't look good right now. I'm just gonna like show them how it should look and how it could look.
Yeah.
And so that was the approach. And so then had a month of like being able to set up my little website, make the business cards, make the logo, all this kind of stuff. And then first client, a lot of good work, and then was like really fun, but really only a couple days work. And then slowly they started coming in, because through friends, like people
Yeah.
started
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
all
Word
of a
of
sudden
mouth.
heard that I was doing freelance work. And then the Instagram thing, I mean, pure fluke and happenstance, right? Like, it's a combination of putting yourself out there, being at the top of like the Dribbble page, like popular page on that day, plus having a blog post out. And so really it's like a perfect storm of and in the most entitled way, people like to say this, creating opportunity for yourself, right? Or
Yeah.
like manifesting something. But I always think that's a little bit hairy. Like, you have
Yeah.
much less control probably than you think you have. But it's important to think it, because otherwise you're just going to like float around
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
no idea.
Absolutely.
Um, and yeah, and so I had a conversation, obviously, with Instagram founders, and then one of their engineers, and we just started the same way, contracting remotely, and we started on the website, because that was the thing that I was comfortable with, and a lot of the mobile stuff already had a roadmap and was underway,
Yeah. Right.
and throughout, like I think like the second or third month into this contract, I all of a sudden get a text message from Kevin being like, "Do you know Tim Van Dam?" And I was like, "What are you about to ask me?" and that's when Tim, all of a sudden, the whole Gowalla acquisition had happened, and that's when Tim was looking
Oh.
around, and so I was like, holy shit, like we get to like work together, and like we can do the whole like both like run a platform kind of thing, which was super awesome. And so, but what was really interesting about that was, I was running a bunch of this like visual language stuff for the site, because the Instagram website was brown at the time. It was brown, blue, and white, and it had like 3 different typefaces.
Yeah,
There was
right.
you couldn't write. There was like only, it was read only. You couldn't log in or anything, and so that was like kind of the things that we started with, and we actually started with developer tools, because I was like, developer tools have the most different types of styles on this page when it comes to content. So like, let's just look at the content on this page and tear it all apart, and then I'll design it, and then I'll also implement it, because I was still like really like pretty good, at least with HTML and CSS. And then I very quickly had to learn Django and Python, because the Instagram stack was like Django, Python, Postgres, Redis, and we eventually put a Memcache layer on it. And then Rick Branson and Mike Krieger can tell you all the other pieces.
Yeah, sure. How many people are working at Instagram at the time? Paint us a picture of the company.
When I started contracting, it was 6. And eventually when I got on site, there were 12 people before me. And so I was the last one that got in before the acquisition happened, which happened like a month after. Like, so this was like really interesting, because
how long did you contract for?
Like 6 months, because we were working on the visa, which, thank God, I mean, if we want to get into the whole political H-1B thing, let's not, but it was because of the financial crisis, visas were still in abundance, and because the cap hadn't been met yet, people weren't
yeah, right,
getting like immigrants for skilled labor, as they call it. And so even in November, I got super lucky in getting an H-1B visa. And so, come March, I was able to probably join like a little earlier, probably January, February, but come March, I moved over. And then in April, the acquisition happened. But it became very, very clear that as soon as I landed, I was really kind of on this separate track, working on this like high level design, like system and style stuff for the web. And then I landed, and I think the question was like, okay, do you want like a week to like land and like get your bearings? And I was like, no, I want to immediately start working. And so I landed on a Tuesday. I start working on a Thursday. Like in between, the only thing I did is like one IKEA run and one like like Walgreens run to get stuff for the bathroom.
Yeah.
And the Thursday is like, okay, so we're launching Android. We need a teaser page where you put your email address in. 2 days, thing went live. Okay, now the thing is out. We're gonna have to send an email eventually with the, hey, it's launched. And we're going to have a launch page for it. And we're going to have to change Instagram.com. And so that was the next week of work.
No.
And so it was all like, just like, throwing things online. And it was just constantly building stuff. And so, and then once you're there and you have, access to, like, remote working wasn't obviously as good as it is now. You have access to people's brains, and you're like working on some stuff. I had this backlog of like Instagram.com work that I wanted to push out. And so all of a sudden we started doing comments on the web, and we started allowing, we got rid of all the brown as much as we could. So it was all like blue and like 4 tints of gray, I think, and a 1% noise on everything, which was this PNG that was just everywhere.
Yeah, right. So hold on. If I look on Instagram.com right now, how much of that is still your sort of system design thing?
Oh, that's all been changed.
Yeah.
So eventually we went through like the iOS 7 redesign, which was like something that I did with one of our, I think at the time still are like one of the first true iOS engineer that we hired, who was still one of my very close friends. That's a fun story we can get to in a sec, but so we just started pushing all this stuff out, and it was great because it was all server rendered, because we got to get to that in a little bit. That's kind of a little bit of the audience. It was all server rendered, and until I started working on like user profiles, right? So like Instagram.com / like your username, basically. And then all of a sudden we were doing this thing where, well, now we have to query the back end. We have to get a list of these things. Like in any client, you just like get the list, you manipulate it in the client, basically. And that's why all of our native apps are so fast. But on the web, we were just generating HTML server side. And so that didn't work. We didn't even have to try the load test for that. We just knew that that was not going to work because we were like hitting the back end so much. And so then, comes the kind of edge of my knowledge that I hit when everything was running on Backbone and handlebars and like all kinds of like, strung together. And it was definitely not bulletproof. And so that wasn't launchable. So all of a sudden we're like, we have gone through the acquisition period, which had this FTC review. And so we're at the start, I think, of 2013 all of a sudden. And we have this thing has been laying around for like 2-3 months because we can't launch it. And we don't have, we've started focusing on photo tagging, and we started focusing on like all of these other things that are much more important, honestly. And so we really needed to solve this problem of the performance of our website. And that's when we got really lucky, because like we sat next to the photos team at Facebook, which had this guy working on the video player and all this kind of stuff. And his name is Pete Hunt. And Pete is like widely known in the JavaScript and the React community now, of course. And there were a couple of contending frameworks being built at Facebook at the time, but he was like really on the React train. And all of the like household names now that worked at Facebook at the time or are still at Facebook were a part of that train, effectively. Yeah. And so he was the one who we were talking with him, and he basically did a demo of this to Mike, the co-founder, and then Shane, who was like the first engineer, and they were both like, "Oh, this looks like good." And I looked at it and I was like, "Oh, like XML and JavaScript, great." No one ever, but to me it was like, "Oh, I can see this. I don't have to like MVC the shit out of everything." It's like, "Oh yeah, everything is
obviously together." Great.
Obviously great for me.
Yeah,
obviously great for me. The whole life cycle stuff I was just dying because I just couldn't wrap my head around it. But as soon as like, a file was wired up a little bit, I could just mess with it. And so, we chose the framework team, or Pete switched teams, and 2.5 weeks later, we launched it and it was out. And then all of a sudden we were like, well, if we can wire this up, how fast can we wire up our photo pages again, like from scratch, and make them way more interactive and way more stateful? And then we did that. And then we were like, well, can we get a feed online? And then we did that, and that rolled out like in like 3-week cadences, because all of a sudden we had a thing to work with, and that was like React 0.3.6 or 8 or
whatever
4 or whatever it was.
So
we were constantly like changing things in the back end. And then we obviously, to like kind of add some firepower, we got very lucky because Ben Newman like joined the team, and he is obviously like this genius when it comes to general computer science, but also like he has put his energy on the front end stack, of course. And so we were doing all this crazy Webpack stuff. I mean, Pete and Ben can talk about that way better than I can. But what was great was we had this point where this team had velocity, and I actually switched my energy to mobile design all of a sudden, because we were finally getting some metrics in. And we were seeing that, mobile obviously had way more engagement because Instagram was mobile first. And even though this was like started becoming a great web product, it was never going to see that much engagement on web.
Yeah.
But throughout the time, like even while working on mobile, and, we started doing some, I would be the one ping ponging back. So we did the video embed, or like the web embeds, and like the video player and all this kind of stuff that we had to do for supporting all these launches. And, concurrently, obviously I had a pretty strong relationship with the React team. And so then all of a sudden this idea of like open sourcing React comes out, and, with all of the internal struggles that came with, of course.
Was that a big struggle internally?
I think Facebook hadn't open sourced anything like material, like meaningfully large at the time that I was aware of, and there wasn't an organization behind it, and it wasn't necessarily a thing that was widely carried. That was like kind of the future of a lot of the engineering team at Facebook. But the rest is already a history, right? Because there are so many things that piggybacked off of being able to have React open sourced, because then all of these other frameworks that were laying around Facebook that eventually also started empowering each other became visible to the rest of the like front end engineering community and engineering community in general. And that was, I think, that was extremely meaningful. But what was funny is, at the time we're like, okay, we're launching React. Okay, we need to launch website. Cool. Like, yank together a website. It doesn't have to be that cool. And then, I guess we need a logo. and it's like, that was like purely, okay, well, go on a whiteboard. Like, what is this? It's this thing where we could have spent 80 hours on this, or we could have spent 800 hours on this, or we could have spent, a couple hours on this. And it ended up just like being a couple of minutes, because if you have if your design team is like a bunch of engineers and you're like, well, okay, so React, like it's like something that is like has to do with science, and like, okay, we have like clouds, and like there's like electrons and atoms and this kind of stuff, and so all of a sudden we call it React. Okay, well, there's a cloud around it. Okay, we can draw it like this, and then we saw this cog kind of show up in the center of it, and we were like, oh my god, it's a cog and a cloud, and all this stuff completely makes sense.
Obviously.
So obviously, quote unquote, everything's arbitrary, right? So,
yeah, for sure.
And so, yeah, we were able to, we just like kind of threw it out there, not knowing that this thing was going to go everywhere, that the whole language, of like atom and electron and like all this and all the stuff that is built on top of it, obviously, is related to each other. But yeah, that was really the 2013 kind of time at Instagram, basically.
So
and
you made that original React logo, which is still the React logo today, right?
It still is. And I actually I've talked to some people about wanting to tweak it a little bit, because I think it's time for it to be a little bit like, for it to get a lot more love than it got at the start.
To be fair though, I think it's held up. That's a testament to how well it's held up. That even because usually, like, if I look at my work from like whatever 7 years ago, well, 7 years ago I wasn't even working, so that doesn't even count. But like, even if I'm looking at my work from 3 years ago, I'm going, oh, that was so bad. Like, I could have done this so much better, right? So the fact that you're just feeling like it needs a couple tweaks is a testament to your skill.
Well, it'll probably be like many more tweaks.
Yeah, fair enough.
But
I can't wait for the React logo version 2.
Well, what's interesting is the logo. I think the typeface on the logo is Proxima Nova, which was the web typeface at Instagram at the time. And that's how like simple it was, because we had the web license. We were just like using that.
Yeah, of course you were.
But yeah, I mean, that was what was easy. But yeah, I mean, that shows you, like, sometimes when things, I love things going fast like that, because a lot of the arbitrary time spent, it's like Parkinson's law, right? Like, the task will take up the amount of time allotted to it.
Yeah.
Is much more. I'd much rather run fast and then tweak later than, opine, like not put anything down, and then talk in a circle instead of like seeing an outcome. And that was, then we kind of like track away from this whole like React kind of hybrid designer engineer thing, to doing a lot more like, product management and data sciencey work once I moved into Facebook, which was this thing where, Facebook is like, the tech stack is much bigger. I started working on the search team. I can't for my life like make any sense out of what a search engine looks like. But a lot of the stuff from, the statefulness and like that mindset I brought with in thinking of like, okay, how can we make these things better? How can we make these things faster? Really hoping that they would, redo Facebook.com eventually, which they recently did.
Well, that's been like 6 years.
That was a giant, it was a giant project, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, kind of went just like, underground on like using my engineering chops, and that recently kind of came back. Once I was like, last year I was working at this company called Glossier, and like we have, we at the time had like a Rails backend, but on top of it, everything was React. And so I started like fiddling around again, and I never was actually playing with things when the syntax started changing. Like, actually, that's not true. I updated my website a couple times, and then as I was updating my like package file, everything broke.
Of course.
And then I had to like find all the breaking changes, and then rewrote a couple of things. So I kept I at least like kind of brushed up on what was happening, and as the life cycle function started going away, I was like very happy.
Nice.
Um, but yeah, I mean, actually, what's really funny to think back at like the saga of time. One of the biggest arguments between Pete and I have always been where the CSS goes,
No
which is funny to be
way.
talking to you, right? Like
Yeah, that
because
is
like
ridiculous.
he was always like, oh, this needs to be in the file with it, and I was like, no, this needs to be separate. Separation of
No
concerns. Like, you know,
way.
yeah. And then the
God
way
damn
that
it,
we
Michael.
did
I'm
it
ending this
was
call right now. You're on the wrong side of
the
history here. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, but the thing, my problem
Yeah.
with it was, and I use stock components everywhere now. My problem with it was that the argument that was being made is that we were going to use the JS syntax for CSS.
Yeah,
So
right.
like camel case font size, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, that is just
Yeah, right.
not productive. And so we ended up finding this way that we just like named the modules the same, and we put them in the same folder, and then they would just like be injected and transpiled,
Yeah, right.
which was good enough for me
Yeah,
at
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
time.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. That is
But you
really
know,
funny
but
to know. I had no idea that that was the case.
oh yeah, we that was like the biggest like we could probably still just like sit down and like have a coffee and like argue about that for like the pros and cons of that, because I think that there is something very interesting about the power of the cascade that obviously makes a lot of sense in many cases.
Yeah.
But when you're working on a software project with so many other people, you need to let go of that a little bit because of the ability to like atomize like and modularize your work.
Yeah.
But it was that was the stuff that we cared about. That was the stuff that mattered.
Nice. Nice. I
Yeah,
did
it was
React
a good
change a
time.
lot in those like early versions from when you started using it at Instagram to like let's say when it was open source? Like was there a lot of churn at the time or was it pretty well defined already?
I think from what I was able to see, it was pretty well defined.
Interesting.
It was a lot more stable like that when it came out, because we were also just to gut check a lot of this stuff. I don't know if it was Pete or Ben or who wrote this, but we wrote this thing called Huxley, which like we also open sourced at the time. I think it's like a dead project now. And what it did, it used like I think a headless browser to just take pictures of the screen, and then we would roll those diffs into the pull request. So we could, if there was a diff on the image,
Oh.
then we could see that there was a CSS bug being introduced and stuff.
Yeah, right.
There is like probably way better npm packages for that now because there's an npm package for everything. But yeah, that was like the way that we kind of made sure that we didn't update React and it broke a part of the page, or B, like we didn't change a CSS line somewhere and had unintended consequences.
Yeah.
But we really, it was like a pretty brittle time on the web still. I mean, the web is still very young, even though we like talk about it like we've been on here for a very long time. But yeah, it was very, very QAing is a very important part that no one ever talks about. And just, humans shouldn't like do much QA. Humans should be empowered to do good QA, right? And so I think that was the way that we made sure that we had enough like insight into what was changing. We would still run into a couple of bugs when it came to like states that we didn't capture, but that was very important to us at the time.
That makes a lot of sense. So I want to take a step back for a second. You were a kid from a small town in the Netherlands, Maastricht. You grew up there, having one of the first. I can't believe you had one of the first internet cables in your entire town. That is kind of incredible to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're one of the first kids with an internet connection. Now suddenly you're in San Francisco. You work not just at a small company, which I guess you were kind of used to from the agency, but at Facebook, right? A massive company, even at the time, with I assume many thousands of employees at that point. How did that feel to you? Was that like a natural transition? Did you feel welcome in the industry or in the city or in California? Were there any particular struggles that you had?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. The thing that I didn't realize was the cost discrepancy with like cost of life here versus home. And what I'd slated out, what I was going to make in my hometown was actually more than my base salary at Instagram at the time. But I was like, this is like I want to work here. Like I was like
Yeah.
on that, I was on Instagram like on day one. Like this is like a company that I think is doing something really important, because I also have a very, heavy photography habit slash hobby. And so what was, yeah, I think the thing that was really cool was the feeling that I had, and this kind of goes in waves now, but the feeling that I had when I came to San Francisco was the same feeling that I would have when I would go to these conferences at the time, which was like, these are my people.
Yeah.
Like, and for better or for worse, right? Like you have the trope of like, well, I'm sitting in a coffee shop and this person is talking about the Series A or like whatever. Like, it's, you I got pretty jaded about that towards the end, and that's why I went to New York for a year and a half and now back. But I think that there was this being away from it for a while. The thing that I really found was there is this blind optimism, and this comes with a lot of issues, and we're seeing this now with a bunch of these tech companies not having taken responsibility where they should, or like they try to steer clear of it, Facebook included. And they can't anymore, and I think it's very important to like start taking responsibility and to like start thinking about these things. However, I found that elsewhere, including New York, there is much more of a onus on why something can't work, and working hard is still very important, instead of why something can work. And I think that that's what San Francisco still does pretty well. It's like, well, you want to work on this, great, go do it, and if you fail, all right, leave it where it was and go do something else again. And that was the thing that I found. So I lived in a very small bedroom that was very dark. I got lucky because one of my friends from the that I used to go to conference with, he had someone move out, and so that's just where I landed. So I got a very soft landing. I was able to then move in with like one of my best friends still, who's still at Instagram actually. His name is Dan. He runs the community lab team now. So he has kind of made his corner in the company to look at like what is culturally happening on the platform and how do we empower that in the best way possible. It was nice, but all of a sudden I had a roommate, which I never had before, which was also one of those things. But I was just purely heads down on work. So, mostly it was 6 days of work a week at least. And then and some side projects at the time. Still, I was like burning it on all ends, and then maybe sit in Dolores Park for a couple hours with friends to like relax the brain. But they were simpler times back then, and I think that now we have to think about all of the things we take for granted and how we can actually use that. How we can at least analyze that and be aware of like the stuff that we get to take for granted because other people don't get to. And how do we empower the people that actually don't get to? So like, I got extremely lucky coming here, and how do I pay that forward now? I think that's like a really important thing. And I think that's always what's been super fascinating to me about, obviously open source, which it comes with all of its issues, right? Like all these communities have a lot of issues, and there's a lot of people, hiding behind a handle or a username being assholes.
Yeah, of course.
But much less, it seems to me, much less so than it used to be, because like a lot of this work has gotten way more human. It's an actual career path now, which I find amazing because, GitHub sponsors and all these projects actually let you build something. And so I think that is the value of software has changed and how we look at this. And I think that there's also slowly an awakening around how not everything has to be like a rocket ship, but there is like this world in which we can all make small bit, like have our place and make things that we are passionate about, and that we deeply care about building. And as we, obviously with coronavirus happening right now and everyone being more and more like remote, kind of being uplifted, and people in places where normally a job wouldn't be available because of archaic like remote working policies, we're going to see an interesting wave now of talent being picked up somewhere.
Yeah.
Even though we deal with with visa issues and like with things being paused, like I think this is it's a super interesting time. It's a super scary time,
Yeah.
but I do think that there is a lot of good ahead. And that, I think, the mindset of San Francisco is the thing that I just needed to be reminded of, which is why I moved back. Because when I was back here in January for like a couple of weeks just to see if I wanted to move back, just yeah, the conversations that I was having and just the care that people had instead of, you know, trying to look cool. Like I still love New York as a city, but like there was just like too much. There's like too much smoke and mirrors, and not enough like really die hard work with some sense of purpose at least.
Yeah.
Be that, you know, actually changing the world, or be that being meaningful to colleagues, or be that being meaningful to a community.
I actually think that that's a great point to end on. That was a beautiful message.
Great. I have no idea why we call this Everything is a Remix now,
Doesn't matter. Not that important.
but that was a good hook. That was a good hook.
I like the hook. Also, this was a great conversation. I actually feel like I have so many questions in my head that I want to ask you. So we got to do this again sometime. Because
Sounds good.
That was great. That was great. I loved it. That was such a great message to end on. Thanks everybody for tuning in. If you want to follow Michael anywhere, he's at McD, I guess on Twitter. Are you at McD
Twitter,
everywhere?
Instagram, everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere. Yeah. All right, everywhere. He's great. Go follow him. And thanks for being on here.